They say betrayal from enemies is survivable, expected even. But what if the ones who destroy you share your last name? My name is Allara Merritt, decorated officer, silent warrior. I've faced enemies behind encrypted walls and battlefield lines, but nothing prepared me for the moment I stood in full uniform while my own family stripped me of everything: home, honor, even my name. In that cold courtroom, they looked me in the eye and called me a danger, a failure, a ghost. I stayed silent because I knew something they didn't. The real war had just begun, and I didn't need rage. I had evidence. What happened next wasn't just justice. It was something far more explosive. I stood in that courtroom wearing the same uniform I had worn on missions no one would ever hear about. The medals on my chest didn't matter here, not in front of these faces, not in front of my family. It was strange how quiet everything felt, like time had slowed just enough to stretch every breath. My parents sat across from me, my brother and his wife next to them. They didn't look like the people I grew up with, not anymore. Their expressions were calm, practiced, like they had rehearsed this moment without me. They accused me of being unstable, said I had abandoned the family, said I didn't deserve the home I helped pay off or the assets I earned while risking my life overseas. The worst part wasn't their words. It was how easy it came to them, as if I'd never been part of their lives, as if the years I spent away were a betrayal to them instead of a sacrifice I made for everyone. I didn't argue. I didn't raise my voice. I let them talk. When you've served long enough, you learn the value of silence. You learn how to hold it like a weapon. And in that courtroom, I held it close. I remember looking at my mother. She couldn't meet my eyes. My father stared at the floor. My brother leaned forward like he was doing the world a favor. His wife sat there with her hands folded neatly in her lap, a soft smile on her face like she'd already won something. They thought they were tearing me down, but I wasn't there to beg for understanding. I wasn't there to win their approval. I was there for the truth. Tucked in my hand was a single sheet of paper, thin, ordinary, but I knew what it held. I had spent months preparing for this, digging, watching, piecing things together while they thought I was too broken to fight back. When the time was right, I stepped forward, calm, steady. Every step echoed through the room. I handed the paper to the judge and asked that he read it before continuing. He adjusted his glasses and began. At first, his face was unreadable, but then something shifted. His jaw tightened, his eyes narrowed. He placed the paper down, looked to the bailiff. His voice was sharp. Close the doors. No one moves. The silence cracked like glass. My parents paled. My brother froze. His wife reached for his hand, whispering something I couldn't hear, and then the doors opened, again. Federal agents stepped in, quick, controlled, no shouting, no drama, just authority. I didn't move. I didn't speak. I didn't need to. I watched as the life they had built on lies began to unravel. They had come for everything I owned, my home, my savings, my name. But they didn't realize I had already been fighting a different war. Not for things, but for the truth they thought no one would find. The truth doesn't always arrive with fireworks. Sometimes it slips in quietly, through paper, through silence, through patience. They had spent so much time trying to erase me that they never noticed I had been watching, waiting. And when the moment came, I didn't strike out of anger. I didn't scream or accuse. I simply placed the truth in front of those who could see it for what it was. They thought silence meant weakness, but silence can be strength. Silence gives you room to gather, to aim, to choose your moment. And when the cuffs snapped shut, I didn't feel victorious. I didn't feel vindicated. I just felt still. Because sometimes the loudest justice is the one that arrives without sound, without warning, only clarity. And this was just the beginning. It started with an email, one of those quiet moments you don't expect anything from. I was at the kitchen table sipping a cup of coffee that had gone cold. The sun was barely up. Just me, the morning stillness, and a chipped mug I had carried through more than one relocation. The message came in like any other, a notification ping, a subject line that didn't make sense. Veteran relief enrollment confirmed. I frowned. I hadn't signed up for anything. My benefits were intact. My finances were modest but steady. There was no reason I would need assistance. I almost deleted it. Thought it was a scam at first, but then I opened it. Just to be sure, that's when I felt it. My full name, my military ID, my deployment records, my current address. It was all there. Not the kind of information someone would guess, not the kind of thing a stranger could fake. It was real. The money had already been disbursed to an account I didn't recognize. That cold tightening in my chest, I hadn't felt it in years. I shut the laptop and stared out the window. Everything looked the same. The neighbor's dog barked. A delivery truck idled nearby, but inside, something had changed. Later that afternoon, I made a call. Quiet, discreet. An old contact I'd worked with years ago in financial intelligence. Someone I knew wouldn't ask too many questions. By the end of the day, pieces had started falling into place. The house I had grown up in had been refinanced months earlier. Ownership now sat under a shell company, the same company my brother once bragged about during a Thanksgiving dinner. Back then, he called it a side project. Something simple, unimportant. Now it owned the house I had helped pay off with combat pay from my third deployment. I went through the paperwork line by line, deed transfers, signatures, legal, filings, the kind of details people ignore unless they're trained not to. At the bottom of one document, something small caught my eye, a faint blue smudge, printer ink. When we were younger, my brother used to work at a print shop. He hated how the ink stuck to his fingers. No matter how much he scrubbed, there was always a stain. It was a detail no one else would notice. But I did. The next morning, I found him sitting in the living room, feet up, casual, scrolling his phone like nothing had happened. His wife leaned on his shoulder, all softness and fake warmth. I showed him the paperwork. "What's this?" He barely looked at it, just muttered something about it being business, said our parents signed off, said I didn't need to worry. I asked why my name was removed, why I hadn't been told. He shrugged. "You're never here." That was the moment I knew. This wasn't a misunderstanding. This wasn't a mistake. It was a choice. I turned to my parents, asked if they knew, if they understood what they had signed. My mother's voice was quiet, almost ashamed. "He explained everything," she said. "It's for the best." There was no argument, no yelling. Just that moment of understanding, the kind that breaks something deep inside you. I nodded once and left the room. No one followed me. In the hallway mirror, I caught my reflection, the uniform I had spent my life in, the medals, the quiet weight of sacrifice. And behind all that, a face I barely recognized. That evening, we sat around the dinner table, talking about the weather, groceries, as if nothing had changed. But everything had. This wasn't just about a house. It wasn't about money. It was about being erased. 2 weeks later, the lawsuit arrived. The envelope heavy with names and allegations, emotional manipulation, financial misconduct, misuse of family trust, all directed at me. By noon, it hit the local news. By nightfall, it went regional. Decorated veteran accused of exploiting parents. The photos they used were harsh. My military ID. A shot of me from years ago, stern and cold. The kind of image that says nothing but suggests everything. Friends called. Some didn't. The silence grew louder than the headlines, and I realized something terrifying. I wasn't fighting to keep a family. I was fighting to uncover the truth they didn't think I could see. Because while they played games in daylight, I had already stepped back into the shadows, and I knew how to move in the dark. After the story hit the news, the silence came fast, not the kind of silence you ask for, the kind that wraps around you without warning. One moment, you're a respected veteran with a name built on years of service. The next, you're the shadow in the room, the name no one wants to mention. They said I manipulated my parents, pressured them, used my military rank to intimidate. They made it sound clinical, convincing. I read the legal language over and over, but none of it felt real. It was like watching someone else's life unravel, except it was mine. The worst part wasn't the accusation. It was how easily the world believed it. Friends I'd known for years stopped returning messages, even the ones who'd cried at my retirement ceremony, the ones who once said they'd stand by me no matter what. My commanding officer sent me an email offering administrative leave, said it was to focus on personal matters. It was phrased kindly, but I knew what it meant. I had become a liability, so I stepped back. I didn't fight it, I needed space anyway. At first, I thought I'd use the time to catch my breath, maybe figure out how to fix things. But the more I tried to explain, the more I realized no one wanted to hear it. People like their villains, simple. And I had already been cast. I stopped going to the gym, stopped running into familiar faces. Even grocery runs turned into short, strategic missions, in and out, eyes down. I went to the diner my mother and I used to visit. The waitress looked up, then quickly looked away. The TV behind the counter played my story on loop, my face paired with cold headlines and colder commentary. I left without ordering. The house felt smaller after that, the walls tighter. The silence inside wasn't peace. It was weight, heavy, still, suffocating. I kept reading the documents, legal filings, trust records, transaction logs. I didn't know what I was looking for yet, but I couldn't stop. I had been trained to look for patterns, to find meaning in noise. But this time, the noise was coming from inside me. There were moments I wondered if they were right. Was I too cold? Too distant? Had I become someone no one recognized anymore? Those thoughts didn't come as loud doubts. They crept in slowly. A sentence here, a memory there, like hairline fractures spreading across glass. I remembered coming home from my last deployment. No one met me at the gate. My brother didn't return my call. My parents left a note on the counter that said they'd gone out for dinner. No welcome home, no hugs, just silence. Even then, I'd told myself it wasn't intentional. People were busy, life was complicated, but now, looking back, it felt different. Like maybe I'd been on the outside longer than I wanted to believe. The lawsuit claimed I had twisted the truth, that I had guilted them into handing over control of family finances, that I had turned my service into manipulation. And suddenly, all those years of dedication, all the discipline, all the silence that kept others safe, none of it mattered. It had been rewritten into something ugly. But here's the thing they never understand about people like me. You don't survive war by letting go of who you are. You don't survive betrayal by screaming into the void. You survive by waiting, by watching, by knowing that patience can be deadlier than any weapon. So I didn't post a defense. I didn't hold a press conference or write a dramatic letter. I went quiet. Because sometimes silence isn't surrender. Sometimes it's strategy. And as the headlines spun, as the public turned, I sat at my desk surrounded by documents that no one else had seen. And I began to notice things, small things. A company name that didn't exist 5 years ago. A financial trail that looped through veteran programs and back into accounts tied to people I barely recognized. At first I thought I was grasping, seeing ghosts. But then the pieces started forming lines, straight, sharp, deliberate. I wasn't unraveling. Something else was, something darker. And I knew I had to keep going, because this wasn't about clearing my name anymore. This was about exposing the kind of truth that doesn't just ruin reputations, it shatters everything. There's a rhythm to this kind of work. The long nights, the glowing screen, the quiet clicking of a mouse, while the rest of the world sleeps. It's nothing like the movies, no big discoveries in the blink of an eye, just small details that start connecting in ways you don't expect until you realize you're standing on something unstable, something no one else sees yet. It started with a name I didn't recognize, Violin Group Holdings. It kept showing up in documents tied to the family trust. At first, I thought it was just a placeholder, some legal proxy to move assets, but the more I looked, the more it didn't make sense. No business filings, no employees, no address that wasn't a post office box, just numbers, money flowing in and out, always just under reporting thresholds. I'd seen this before, not in civilian life, but overseas, in war zones. Back then, I was trained to trace dirty money, funding routes used by terrorist groups, digital laundering networks, the quiet movement of data dressed up as corporate transactions. I hadn't touched that part of my training in years, but it came back quickly, like muscle memory. I followed the transactions, small amounts, strange timing. Every deposit looked harmless in isolation, but together they told a different story. Aid money from veterans programs rerouted, grants applied for using real names, soldiers I'd served with. Some were dead, some were alive and unaware, and every time the money ended up in shell companies connected to Valen Group. That's when I saw it. Eva's name, her counseling practice, something she had once described at dinner as her passion project, was listed as a referral source. Patients with trauma, PTSD, combat-related anxiety. Except some of those patients didn't exist. Others were real but had no idea their records were being used. It wasn't just fraud. It was identity theft. It was systematic. I sat back in my chair, heart pounding, because this wasn't just about me anymore. This wasn't a bitter sibling rivalry or a broken inheritance battle. This was organized. And then I noticed the timeline. Some of the largest transfers happened when I was deployed, when I wasn't there to see what was happening, when my presence or absence was the perfect cover. I knew what I was looking at, but I needed more. So I pulled every record I had, property deeds, medical billing history, email headers. The internet leaves fingerprints if you know where to look. And that's when it all began to shift. One transaction stood out. Not because of its amount, but because of where it ended. A foreign-owned bank flagged years ago in cyber ransom laundering reports. That alone was bad enough, but buried 3 layers deep in the metadata was a familiar name. Not from my family, from my classified work, a firm tied to intelligence leaks and defense contractor infiltrations. The pit in my stomach went cold. They weren't just stealing money, they were accessing data. Military records, clearance renewals, deployment patterns. It looked like consulting on paper, but it smelled like espionage. And the scariest part? It was happening in plain sight. Eva, my brother, my parents' signatures on key authorizations. Maybe they didn't understand what they were signing. Maybe they didn't care. I wanted to believe it was just about greed, that they were using me, sure, but only for access, not for something bigger. Not for something this dangerous. But the pattern didn't lie. I started hearing noises at night. Not loud, just enough to make me check the locks twice. Cars idling too long outside. My email showing logins I didn't make. And then, one evening, a call came from an unlisted number. A voice I didn't recognize told me to stop digging. I didn't reply. I just hung up. That's when I knew I was close. Because when people start trying to scare you off, it's not about you being wrong. It's about you getting close to the truth. I doubled down, backed up every file, spread copies across trusted hands, every detail, every transaction, every anomaly. I wasn't just building a case. I was building a wall they wouldn't be able to climb once the truth came out. And I knew what I had to do next. Because this wasn't just about betrayal anymore. It was about protecting the very thing I had spent my entire life defending, and I wasn't going to let anyone, family or not, tear that apart. I didn't sleep much the night before, not from fear. I had already moved past that. Fear had become something quieter, dull, settled, almost familiar. What kept me awake was the clarity, the stillness that comes when you've already made your choice and there's nothing left to weigh. I put on the uniform early, brushed the creases from the sleeves, polished the brass. Not because I wanted to prove anything, but because it reminded me who I was before all of this, before the accusations, before the lies, before my own family tried to erase me. The courtroom was smaller than I remembered. Pale walls, fluorescent lights, just like any other hearing room. It didn't feel like the place where everything would change, but it was. They were already there when I arrived. My brother, his wife, their lawyers. They didn't look at me, just kept their heads down, whispering between themselves like this was a strategy, meeting instead of a reckoning. My parents sat behind them. My mother clutched a tissue. My father stared straight ahead, jaw tight. Not a glance in my direction. I took my seat, back straight, eyes calm. I had spent my life preparing for moments like this. Not in courtrooms, but on deployments, in rooms where words could carry just as much weight as weapons. Their lawyer spoke first. A woman with the kind of voice that's been trained to sound composed, even while saying things meant to destroy you. She painted a picture of a woman consumed by ambition, claimed I'd used my authority to manipulate, to steal, to divide. She smiled while describing my years of service as if they were symptoms of instability. I listened. No reaction, no rebuttal. When Eva took the stand, she wept, spoke softly, said she was heartbroken over what the family had endured, said she tried to help me. But I had changed. That war had made me dangerous. I let her speak. They expected me to defend myself, to fight, to make noise. But I had already learned that noise doesn't always win battles. When it was my turn, I stood. No speech, no outburst, just a single sheet of paper. I asked the judge to read it, said only that it was relevant to the matter before him. He took it without question. It didn't take long. Line by line, his expression shifted. The calm, bored look vanished. His eyes narrowed. His lips pressed into a line. When he finished reading, he didn't speak right away, just sat in silence. Then he turned to the bailiff. Close the doors. My heart didn't race. My breath stayed steady. But I could feel the room shift, the sudden weight of realization pressing into every corner. My brother looked confused. His wife's hands trembled. My parents froze. And then the doors opened again. Federal agents. They moved quickly, efficiently, like they always do when they've already done their homework. One agent stepped toward my brother, another to Eva. Papers were handed over, charges read, fraud, identity theft, conspiracy, espionage. She broke first, tearful, panicked, trying to explain, to spin the story, but there was no spin left. My brother didn't move. He didn't say a word, just stared at the floor like it had betrayed him too. My parents sat still, pale, fragile. I turned toward the judge. I asked that protections be put in place immediately for any veterans whose identities were used, that the financial trail be followed, that the truth not end here. He agreed without hesitation. That moment, the soft click of cuffs, the silence hanging heavy, it wasn't victory. It wasn't revenge. It was truth. And the truth, when it finally arrives, doesn't need to shout. Later, as they led my brother past me, he looked up. Just once. No rage, no pride, just something hollow. And in a voice barely louder than a whisper, he said something I can still hear. They made me. I didn't respond. Because sometimes there's nothing left to say. I turned back toward my parents. They still couldn't. Look at me. My mother's hands were shaking. My father blinked slowly as if the world was fading in front of him. I leaned in close enough to speak without anyone else hearing. You had a choice. Then I walked away. Some battles don't leave bruises. They leave scars you carry in silence. And sometimes one sheet of paper is all it takes to bring the whole illusion crashing down. After the courtroom cleared, I didn't go home right away. I drove. Nowhere specific, just needed to feel movement, something different from the still air of that fluorescent lit room where everything had come undone and come clear. By the time I stepped into my apartment, the news had already broken. Messages poured in, some from people I hadn't heard from in years, some I never expected to hear from at all. Veteran exposee's family crime ring. Decorated officer delivers silent takedown in court. Whispers turned to headlines. Praise came quickly. So did judgment. Some called me a hero. Others said I had destroyed my family for pride, that I should have handled it quietly, privately, that blood is blood, no matter the mistakes. But here's the thing most people never understand. When your own family uses your name to commit crimes, when they twist your silence into permission, when they stand behind lies while you bury your truth, there's nothing left to protect. Not in the way they mean. I didn't respond to the coverage, didn't issue a statement, didn't try to sway anyone's opinion, because I knew what was real. And more than that, I knew what mattered now. Truth didn't need a headline. It just needed to be known. Still, the fallout came fast. Some organizations I'd worked with quietly distanced themselves. Others offered support quietly behind the scenes. The noise was everywhere. But beneath it all, something steady began to rise inside me. Purpose. Because while I was investigating what they had done, I realized something bigger. If it happened to me, a trained intelligence officer who had served multiple deployments, how many others were vulnerable? Veterans who didn't know how to trace fraud, who didn't know their identities were being used, who didn't have the training, the access, or the network to fight back. That thought wouldn't leave me, so I built something. It started small. Just a laptop and a list of people I trusted, former colleagues, quiet professionals, people who understood discretion and had lived in the shadows long enough to know how to protect others in them. We called it the Sentinel Foundation. No press, no sponsors, just action. We reviewed records for signs of fraud, flagged suspicious activity, provided legal referrals and cyber defense training. We helped survivors of scams, identity theft, and manipulation reclaim their names and their peace. I funded it myself, quietly, reluctantly accepted donations only when they came without strings. And one day, months later, I received a letter, handwritten, simple, no return address. It came from a family had never met. Their father, a veteran, had been targeted by one of the same organizations tied to my brother's scheme. They had almost lost everything, but one of our team members caught it in time, helped them undo the damage. The letter ended with this: "We thought no one would fight for us. Then you did." I read that line 3 times. Then I folded the letter and placed it beside my medals in the drawer I don't open often. That night, I sat on my balcony, tea in hand, the city humming low beneath me. I thought about the little girl I used to be, sitting on the porch, listening to arguments inside, wondering what it meant to be loved without condition. I thought about the woman I became, the wars I fought, both overseas and at home. And I thought about how love, when forced into loyalty, can become something unrecognizable, something you survive rather than seek. What happened in that courtroom wasn't just justice for me. It was a line drawn in the sand. Not because I wanted revenge, because I needed peace, and peace doesn't come from silence that hides truth. It comes from the kind that guards it. I never expected applause. I didn't do this to be admired. I did it so the next person who finds themselves erased by the people they trusted knows they're not alone. So they know that silence, when held with intention, can become strength. And maybe, just maybe, they'll choose to fight too. Not out of bitterness, but out of clarity. Because some battles aren't about winning or losing. They're about remembering who you are and not letting anyone take that away again. Sometimes, the deepest betrayals don't come from enemies or strangers. They come from the people who once tucked you into bed, who shared your childhood meals, who said they loved you. And when that happens, it shakes something inside you that no battlefield ever could. This story isn't just about justice, it's about identity, about what happens when you lose your place in the very home that once shaped you. It teaches us that silence isn't always weakness. Sometimes it's discipline. It's the ability to endure without reacting, to observe when others expect you to fall apart. And in that silence, you find strength, not to retaliate, but to respond with truth. There's a quiet kind of courage in choosing to face the truth, even when it hurts, in walking away from the people who should have protected you and still choosing not to become like them. That's what strength really is. Not revenge, but clarity. Not rage, but resolve. For anyone who's ever felt cast out, overlooked, or used by the ones they trusted most, this story is a reminder. Your worth is not defined by those who fail to see it. You don't need their permission to protect your peace. You don't owe them your silence if it costs you your soul. You are allowed to choose yourself, and sometimes that's the most heroic thing you can do. Thank you for staying with me through this story. If it resonated with you, if it reminded you of a moment when you had to stand alone, find your voice, or choose your peace over pleasing others, I want you to know you're not alone. There is strength in quiet choices, in hard boundaries, and in telling your truth even when it hurts. Stories like this aren't just entertainment. They're reminders. They help us feel seen, understood, and sometimes a little less alone in our own struggles. And if this one spoke to you in some way, I'd be grateful if you took a moment to like the video, share it with someone who might need it, or leave a comment below. I read everyone, and they mean more than you know. And if you'd like to hear more stories about resilience, redemption, and the quiet power of truth, please consider subscribing. This channel is a space for real emotions, hard lessons, and the kind of healing that happens when we let ourselves feel it all. So from my heart to yours, thank you. Keep choosing yourself. Keep choosing truth, and we'll see you in the next story. The